Hello, everyone. I believe we can get started now. It's just around 8:30 Cambodia time, at least. Welcome. All right. I'll go right into the goods today. I am very honored and very excited to be the moderator for today's presenter, Dr. Vichit Sen, who was a 2022 CKS Senior Research Fellow and is a sessional lecturer in the Department of Educational Studies in the University of British Columbia. His presentation today, titled Captive Subjects, Highly Educated Cambodians and Higher Education Policymaking in Postcolonial Cambodia. We'll get started as soon as he is ready. So I hand the mic off to you, Vichit.
Thank you very much, Jessica, for your kind introduction. So let me begin by sharing my PowerPoint presentations then. So I suppose you can see the PowerPoint slides, all right, yeah? Okay, good, thank you very much. All right, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to today's talk. Thank you very much for joining today's presentation. So my presentation today is based on a research project which was funded by CKS through a senior research fellowship back in 2022. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank CKS for the funding, which allowed me to go to Cambodia and collect data between June and August 2022. So this project, the broader project examined the roles of Cambodia of highly educated Cambodians in their contributions to Cambodia's higher education reforms in the past 2 decades. And the focus of my presentation today is on the subjectivities of these Cambodians, specifically on who they are and how they perceive their contributions to Cambodia's higher education reforms within this so-called post-colonial context. So this is an outline of my presentation. So I'll give a brief review of the points of departure that led me to be interested in this project. I'll talk briefly about the conceptual perspectives and then research methods before I discuss some of the findings. So let me begin by briefly introducing a few key points that led me to this research question in the first place. First of all, 2 bodies of existing scholarship drew me to this topic. The first body of scholarship relates to post-colonial and coloniality studies. So this body of scholarship indicates that colonial conditions continue to persist in post-colonial societies to the present day, even without the presence of colonial administrations to enforce those conditions. Colonial conditions are usually characterized by cultural, political, economic, sexual, spiritual, and epistemic exploitation, oppression, and disruption of indigenous societies. Colonial conditions continue to persist in the forms of weak institutions and ineffective governance structures that were inherited from colonial administrations, in the inequalities in education system that continue to prioritize Western knowledge and languages over indigenous knowledge and languages, in cultural imperialism through continued dominance of Western cultural norms, values, and media, and in the self-image, self-esteem, and of course, aspirations of peoples, and in so many other aspects of our modern existence. The second body of scholarship relates to neoliberalism and globalization. So according to today, neoliberal globalization is a conduit, is a channel for Euro-colonial modernity and Western imperialism to spread across the globe. It enables the Western hegemonic values, ideas, and discourse to universalize the global community. The neoliberal globalization of higher education policy and practice has paved the way for the Eurocentric version of modernity to shape the modernization of higher education institutions across the world. So educational institutions across the world, if you look closely nowadays, are predominantly structured according to the Euro-colonial ways of knowing and rationality, because basically European knowledge is treated as superior in many spheres of life. And in the process, international organizations, including development banks and supranational organizations, are often considered neo-colonial agencies that are playing a key role in reproducing and perpetuating both the colonial conditions from the past and the emerging neoliberal discourse and policies in the present. And usually through conditionalities that are tied to loans or other kinds of assistance, these organizations exert hegemonic and discursive power that shapes the development agendas and education policies in aid-receiving post-colonial societies around the world. And there are plenty of examples from around the world, from Africa to Asia to the Caribbean, Asia, including Southeast Asia as well. Now, the second point of departure for this research is about Cambodia being a post-colonial society in which colonial legacies are still present while neoliberal discourse and policies are taking deep roots. In pre-colonial Cambodia, the nature of schooling was based on the notion of taking the children, usually boys, from the rice fields and giving them back to the rice fields. However, the modernization of the Cambodian school system by the French colonial administration in the early 1900s acted as a sorting machine, selecting the better students from basic education for advanced education, and ultimately for the colonial civil service. And so this notion of upward mobility, upward social mobility through education enticed Cambodians, particularly those from the peasantry class, into aspiring for white-collar jobs in urban centers, often at the expense of aspirations for blue-collar jobs and to the detriment of their local communities. These colonial policies in relation to Cambodia's education development planning were largely reproduced and perpetuated during the late 1950s and 1960s, and in the contemporary context as well. So some of the colonial legacies include like highly centralized control of educational governance and policy, disparity in educational infrastructure, resources, and quality between universities in or educational facilities in rural and urban areas. In the curriculum, for example, the strong emphasis on certain disciplines at the expense of others, the emphasis on Western perspectives on foreign languages, like in the past it was French, but now increasingly it is English, and access, especially we talk about the disparity in access based on social economic status. So although the French colonial administration is no longer present in Cambodia, their colonial legacies largely remain. On top of that, the post-conflict peace building and reconstruction starting at the end of the 1990s has opened the door to the influx of neoliberal policies and practices. So social mobility through education introduced to Cambodians by the French a century ago sounds familiar nowadays and is actually perpetuated and re-emphasized in the current education policies and practices. So some of the neoliberal influences in the contemporary education landscape in Cambodia include, widespread privatization of education, education treated as a tradable commodity, students being treated as consumers. Now, the third point of departure for my interest in this research is the increase over the past decade, in particular, in the number of Cambodians completing their master's doctoral programs from Western universities and returning to Cambodia to contribute to the country's socio-economic development in all sectors, public, private, non-profit. You see a lot of people with masters or PhDs working in these sectors. And I think the contribution of these highly educated class deserve more attention and research. And thus this research project in the first place. So within the contemporary context in which colonial legacies from the past meet the neoliberal policies and practices in the present, the central question in my research is, how do these highly educated Cambodians armed with Western education navigate the complexity of post-colonial context and exercise the agency as they try to make contributions to Cambodia's higher education reforms? So there are a few concepts that I would like to touch upon briefly before I talk about the research methods and present some of the findings of this research. So these are the concepts that helped me make sense of some of the data. So first, in simplified terms, mechanisms of responsibilization provide an explanation for how subjects, here subject referred to people, come to assume responsibility or take a particular course of action according to a particular discourse or practice. Here we focus on a Eurocentric neoliberal discourse. So through their sense-making processes and perspectives, we could glean insights about their subjectivities. And there are two mechanisms through which people responsibilize themselves according to a particular discourse or practice. First, people adopt the appeal of freedom when they are persuaded by the appeal of increased sense of personal freedom, agency, quality of life, and possibility of self-actualization. So they perceive themselves to have the autonomy and flexibility to make decisions and to pursue self-determined goals and to realize a certain goals that they think they can make contribution to improving the lives of themselves and of others. So that is briefly about the appeal of freedom. However, when their sense of autonomy and control over events are threatened, people may act in different ways. So they may become passive or indifferent, or they may actively strive to restore their personal control. So on the one hand, when people become passive or indifferent, they resort to what we call learned helplessness. So learned helplessness refers to situations in which people learn that they have no control over the outcomes of their efforts, or when their efforts do not result in anticipated outcomes over a prolonged period. As a consequence, they relinquish efforts to change the course of things, or they basically cease to take initiative, personal effort and responsibility, basically conclude that the issue is beyond personal control and responsibility, and they become indifferent. They just don't care anymore, basically. This could result in what we call silent conformity, or the taming of resistance. It means that like they can't tame the desire to change things or to resist what they want to change. On the other hand, psychological reactance occurs when people remain persistent and strive to restore a sense of control over ongoing events and outcomes of their efforts. And they do so by doing the best they possibly can to try to address the issues they are facing, instead of resorting to passivity, indifference, or withdrawal. And another concept, resisted. So politics in subjectivation, in simplified terms, means that agency is possible, but usually within limits which are governed by others and also by themselves. So these are kind of the concepts that I would like to put out there, so it would make sense when I talk about the findings later on. Now let me talk briefly about the research methods, and then we will go to the research findings. So through the initial steps of research participant identification and snowball sampling technique, I identified more than 20 potential key informants for this study. However, only 13 of them, in which one of whom was a woman, were interviewed between June and August 2022. The rest did not participate for various reasons, usually not responding to requests for an interview or to participate in the study. The 13 key informants included researchers, consultants, or technical advisors, ministry officials, all previously or currently engaged in projects related to Cambodia's higher education reforms. They are considered highly educated Cambodians in this study because they hold a master's or doctoral degree from universities in Europe, North America, Australia, and other Asian countries. So we have 4 people holding a master's degree and 9 holding doctoral degrees. Because the World Bank has been the leader in supporting Cambodia's higher education reforms, it is no surprise that almost all of the key informants were previously or are currently engaged in projects funded through grants or loans from the World Bank. Okay, so let me highlight some of the general findings before I go into detail about the question of subjectivities. So first, now the first key finding I would like to share is that many key informants talk proudly about the increasing number of highly educated Cambodians who have completed their studies and returned to Cambodia to help contribute to the country's higher education reforms, particularly in the past several years, around 2014 until now. I think, yeah, around 2017, rather, yeah. there seems to be a high degree of local ownership of many of the current policy and reform ideas. So, I mean, there have been more involvement by local Cambodians in formulating those policies, ideas. So in referring to local ownership, one key informant kind of joked that previously the Khmer version of our policy documents was tainted with the odor of cheese, but now the English version of the policy documents is tainted with the odor of perhaps or fermented fish. Now, the second one, many key informants acknowledge that colonial legacies continue to be present in the education system, policies, and practices, and that neoliberal policies and practices have added another layer of complexity to the reform efforts. The third one, all key informants acknowledge that they were trained in Western theories and knowledge system. So while their graduate education allowed them to develop and cultivate critical thinking skills, some worry that they may have been trained to embrace a particular knowledge system. The concern is confirmed by the fact that none of them were trained in or are very knowledgeable about non-Western knowledge systems. And the final one I'd like to share is that while there may be a large number of graduates with high credentials returning to Cambodia to contribute to the country's development, many key informants shared a common concern about the prevalence of indifference, of withdrawal, and complacency among many of the graduates, noting that it is not sustainable and effective when only a small group of graduates can roll their sleeves and do the work. So, okay, now let me talk. So there are four forms of subjectivities I would like to discuss next before I conclude the presentation today. So as we may know, it's difficult to put a person in a box. One person may fit into more than one box. However, at the risk of attending to some specificities and leaving out others, I have proposed these four forms of subjectivities, which can represent the dominant characteristics and perspectives of the key informants. These themes are based on a small sample size, and the views are expressed by the people, the key informants who specialize in the field of education, broadly speaking. So the findings are limited by the scope of this sample size and of course of the project itself. So I'll be presenting a summary of each theme of subjectivity, but then we could discuss some of the details afterwards. So the first group, I can title the broad theme. This is a possible panacea for all ills. So for the first group, now let me go back to here. So among these four themes, there were 13 participants. About half fall into the third one. I'll do my best for now, but the rest kind of spread across the other three. So it means there are 2, 3 in the other in each of the other 3 themes. So for the first group, they view Eurocentric knowledge and neoliberal policies as a possible panacea for the issue in the current higher education system in Cambodia, and they think that the reforms should adapt and modify these ideas and best practices from other contexts. They tend to focus on the short-term solutions of addressing the issue, but do not necessarily consider the long-term consequences of adopting neoliberal policies and Western knowledge approaches. They argue that these are the dominant approaches and solutions, and there is nothing else that is more superior, at least for now. We can talk more about this during the question if you're interested. They tend to be inspired by the appeal of freedom that Western knowledge and neoliberal ideas offer them, the autonomy and possibility to make substantive decisions that would allow them to contribute to improving the higher education and the quality of life through their research, through their engagement and in research and analysis. The second group, perhaps I'll make more impactful contributions elsewhere. So for the people in this group, they previously made an effort to contribute to reforms, but were discouraged by the mismatch between their efforts and the outcomes. And they are often critical of the adoption of Eurocentric neoliberal policies ideas without giving those ideas due critical consideration. And they tend to also be critical of their peers who may not give those policies ideas critical attention as well. And they exercise their agency and somehow they're resistant by simply walking away from being directly engaged in the reforms and pursuing something else where they thought they would make more meaningful and impactful contributions to society at large. And these include work in the private sector and teaching at universities. The third group, I'll do my best for now. So for the third group, this is the biggest, as I said earlier, the biggest group representing nearly 50% of the key informants. They can understand that they don't always have control over the outcomes of their efforts, and they increasingly feel the threat to whatever control they still have left. However, instead of walking away or being indifferent, they remain engaged in the reform efforts and try their best within the constraints of their context to address the issues they are facing, to make contributions in whatever way they can. And this somehow allows them to maintain some sense of control over the outcomes of their efforts. They tend to be aware of the long-term consequences of adopting Western neoliberal policies ideas, but are often confronted with the shortage of better alternatives. And they tend to see themselves as change agents. They argue that only through actively doing the work would they be able to engage in critical discussions related to these Western neoliberal policies ideas, perhaps effect some change. However, some of them feel an increased sense of learned helplessness, feeling that they do not see enough expected outcomes of their efforts and are on the verge of becoming group two, that is kind of walking away from all of this and engage in something else that they think they would be more satisfied with the outcomes. And the last group, I'll have to complete this by that year. So group four, the final group here, tend to be checklist-oriented thinkers and obedience implementers. Often due to their positions, they tend to be sitting on the fence when it comes to critiques about Eurocentric neoliberal policies. While they might have their own opinion about these ideas, they are reluctant to express them in ways that would jeopardize their career. They resort to taming their resistance and becoming silent conformists while trying to get things on their checklist done one by one, and usually, keep their finger crossed that they will result in positive outcomes. And so they could, they are already, or they could become complacent. So let me wrap up this presentation by giving a few concluding thoughts. So it is encouraging to learn that there has been an increase in local ownership in Cambodia's higher education policy making reforms over the recent years. And there have been some significant contributions by these educated Cambodians to the reforms, despite the constraints they are facing in their context. There does not seem to be a pause in adopting Eurocentric and neoliberal policy ideas in the current education reforms. Perhaps this approach may have been adopted due to the limited resources we have for the reforms and the continued dependency on assistance from development partners for long-term and well-funded projects. Regardless, it is essential to give important critical consideration or attention to the long-term consequences of this approach, as noted by a few key informants. Within this post-colonial context of Cambodia, many of these highly educated Cambodians are somehow tiptoeing a tightrope between their traditional social cultural framework and the Western neoliberal influences, while trying to make meaningful contributions to the country's higher education reforms. In the midst of all these, a pressing concern is an increased sense of learned helplessness expressed by many of them. What will happen if these highly educated Cambodians become indifferent and complacent as well? I think it would be a significant loss for Cambodia, if nothing else. And thank you very much for your time. Yeah, that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Vichet. That was such an interesting talk. Working with Cambodian university students myself, I already have a bunch of questions coming in my mind. And I just want to remind everyone just verbally what was already put in the chat. If you have any questions for our speaker, you can go ahead and leave them in the chat box. You can raise your hand, you can put them in the Q&A, whatever works. You can put them in the comments if you're watching on Facebook, and someone will get them to us, okay? So it looks like we already have a few questions coming in, which is exciting. Let's go ahead. I believe, Mark Leroux, would you like to go ahead? Let's see. Mark Leroux? Oh, there you go. Sorry about that. Learning Zoom stuff.
I'm sorry, yes, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Dr. Gatsheni, really appreciated that. I'm wondering if you can very briefly discuss the major tenets, differences between the Western approach to education versus more Eastern. Then I'm wondering if you've done any work looking at the educational outcome systems, processes of perhaps Thailand, which was not colonized over the years, and done some comparison and contrast with the Khmer educational system in the post-colonial era, as you talked about today. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Actually, I have not really looked into education in Thailand, so I don't really have much to say about that. And in terms of kind of other knowledge systems and all this, I have basically looked at some of the approaches used in basically look at in a Canadian context in terms of how the differences between indigenous approaches to learning and all of that. in comparison to the Western approaches to education reform. So in Cambodia, I have personally not seen, unless I missed something, I have not personally seen approaches that have adopted this. We have our own kind of, temple-based education system back in the past, in the pre-colonial period, but then since then, it seems we don't really have our way of developing the education system that may be based on our way of understanding, and so this is something that I'm afraid I'm not able to say much because of the not having been able to do the work in relation to the Eastern or other approach of education system.
See. So we have one from our Q&A that's asking, what conditions define and constitute a highly educated Cambodian for you?
As I talked briefly in this presentation in the research methods earlier, so this is a very loosely defined concept in my study. I usually refers to people with high education, and because my research was interested in those who were trained in Western context and how that may have shaped their thinking, and how they use what they've learned to this. So I recruited research participants, basically those who were trained outside Cambodia. And another thing is that I look at this from the perspective of, we have used a lot of aid money in sending a lot of people to studies everything through different, bilateral agreements and all of that, and multilateral agreements. So the idea is looking at the contributions and how those, funds through different loans or through different grants that were used to send Cambodians to through different scholarship programs to study overseas, and how that may help them how that may have impact on the way they make contribution back to the country after coming back. Yeah.
I will be a little bit selfish before we get to the other great questions that are populating the Q&A. And just to go off of what you were just saying, you were talking about how they want to contribute and pursue this kind of different development of Cambodian higher education. And one of the things that I was wondering while you were talking, Vichet, is how your key informants themselves thought about themselves as potential post-colonial subjects in that way. And it seems like some of them are aware of this kind of designation and some of them are a little less willing to engage with that kind of idea. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and what their reflections were if you got into that during your interviews.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Jessica, for this great question. The thing is that based on my conversations with a lot of people, including research participants, the things that when we talk about neoliberal ideas or post-colonial, this is kind of new to a lot of people, although they may have completed their graduate studies, master's or PhD, but because they may not have done the work or the coursework or the reading or anything related to that subject, so that area of study, so they may not have had a kind of in-depth understanding of the concepts. And so a lot of the time, there's this interesting example about a lot of the time people kind of talk about this concept in a way that kind of, not really make sense because they do not have training or anything like that. So basically, from my perspective, is that we kind of limited by what we know, and so the way we rationalize, the way we present an argument is largely kind of limited by what we know, and so that is something interesting as well. For example, one of the research participants I think this is someone from the first group who talks about how this how Western idea of accountability or neoliberal idea of accountability, especially applying this to university lecturer hiring, a ranking system in Cambodia nowadays. It's part of the policy. How this may be able to promote a particular kind of practices that kind of performance, based on performance, how you can track people performance and all that, and that is something that may be used to, according to the participant, used to fix the what that is not working in the current system, the kind of inactivity in the system, but at the same time, in terms of talking about adopting these ideas in the long term, and how this concept has actually been critiqued by people in Canada or in other Western ideas, that this is not the right thing, this is not a good thing to do. Why you want to rank people? Why you want to put performativity framework, accountability framework in your country when this is not this is something that people try to move past. So that's something interesting I've learned as well. Yeah. I hope I addressed the questions you asked earlier, but yeah, feel free to come back and ask.
Yeah, thank you. I'd be excited to see what other people think and other people's questions too. I did see somebody's hand up, but I have a great question, a couple of questions actually from the Q&A that I'll just get to first. So keep your hand raised. Jennifer Estes wanted to ask you two questions, like I was saying. First, she says, you've shown that many of your informants are critical of the ways Eurocentric neoliberal frameworks are incorporated into Cambodian education. Can you please discuss some of the specific policies, practices, ideas that they are critical of? That's one. And then the second one is, you've brought up some interesting ways that your informants' subjectivities are shaped by neoliberalism, i.e. the idea of freedom appeals to them. As scholars have discussed in other contexts, one of the main effects of neoliberalism has been the spread of economic logics to all aspects of life. And I would definitely include education in that, as you were just talking about promotion, tenure, and ranking. In other words, people see things in terms of costs and benefits and returns on investment, including education. Can you talk about whether and how these kinds of economic logics shape your interlocutors' subjectivities generally and their ideas about education specifically?
Okay, that's a lot. So let me go back. It's good that you have the written text here. So I'll go back to the first question here. Thank you, Jennifer. So the first question is,
oh yes, it's about how they're critical of neoliberal frameworks, and she wants to know what those specific policies, practices, and ideas they're critical of.
Yeah, I think I mentioned one earlier about accountability framework, but I think I may have not made it clear earlier that some of them are kind of aware of this, but not many. So for example, one participants can understand the idea of performance-based funding, for example. This is one idea that's based on a neoliberal idea that you provide funding according to the performance. And this is something that I think is increasingly being implemented in different schools, different universities. But one of the research participants can understand that when you tie the funding according to the performance, then you are kind of trying to check the box. And so the risk is that instead of focusing on creating an education that is inclusive, that is holistic, that is equitable, then you are trying to do a few things that that risks kind of narrowing the focus on a few specific things, and that is one of the idea. That is one of the kind of realization of the kind of long-term consequences of adopting this kind of policy framework. So yeah, I'll give that example. And then the second question.
Yes, here, I'll summarize that again. The way that your informant subjectivities are shaped by neoliberalism. So talk about whether and how these kinds of economic logics shape your interlocutor's subjectivity more generally.
Yeah, I think this is something that is kind of prominent among the research participants. I mean, like, people may have ideas about you know, kind of the broader societal values and all that, but at the end of the day, a lot of these are shaped by the economic logics of achieving a particular things in order to you know, move toward something. So the idea of, you know, privatization of education, the idea of education being treated as a commodity. So this is largely influenced by economic logic, that education is an economic capital. And so this kind of shapes the, each time I visit Cambodia, like, it seems that every corner I turn, I see a private school somewhere. And so this is kind of enforced and underpinned by this, you know, entrenched privatization of education and education as a commodity. And so it's about sending kids to school because this is the capital that you can use in order to, you know, perhaps get you a better future than us as parents, for example. So this is kind of underpins the overall idea of education that is underpinned or shaped by the economic logic. And so a lot of the research participants who are, you know, they may be in different kind of groups that I place in there, but they also think about their own economic, you know, standings within which they are operating, while they are thinking about contributing to the economic, to the education reforms and all of those. But at the same time, they're thinking about how much longer can I do this when I'm also trying to, you know, make ends meet as well. So this also drives their thinking about how much can I stay. How much longer can I kind of do this? So that is something interesting I've learned as well. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much. There's a couple more questions, but I did just remember that somebody had their hand up. If you wanted to go ahead and raise your hand again, I will let you go ahead and speak. I'll give you a minute. There you are. Go ahead and ask your questions, and Kim.
Hello, Dr. Richard. Thanks for your very insightful presentation. That really struck me is the learned helplessness that you presented, and that happened to a group of people whom you interviewed. It is as opposed to the growth mindset and the educated individual who already studied abroad came back with the growth mindset already, and over the years they began their growth mindset began to shrink, like age, you know, like tree that is dying day by day. I'm wondering if your research also addressed the solution to these things that happened. And I want to also look want you to describe the situation. Probably you have found, because I'm a Cambodian also, I can imagine that there must be a group of people who are doing their work in the institutions, and they experience learned helplessness, and they take their part-time job doing lecturership in the evening, yeah, in the daytime, they might be experiencing helplessness, but at night, they may be like taking some freedoms, to exercise their way out, what do you see this group of people like? What are they doing that really making sense? Telling themselves that they are liberating themselves from the learned helplessness. I hope it makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, San. So, yeah, excuse me, let me close the window. I cannot see anything. Sorry, it's evening sunset here. So the sun is just right in my face. Okay, so I think in terms of learned helplessness, and this is something that is raised by a lot of people, especially within a workplace context, when one or two people are like doing a lot of work, and the rest of the people are kind of, especially now, trying to put their name on a mission document so that they can get some kind of per diem of that, but not actually going anywhere and doing anything. And so the thing is that I think it's broadly related to the I'm not sure how to put this, kind of broadly the kind of context within which we operate. I think we have a lot of situation in which the people who are in the lower level can observe certain people, and especially when they operate through patron client networks, then when there's a connection between one person has connection to a particular patron, and so then there's this expectations that you don't have to do much, but then you stay here and then get some kind of money from this and from that. So people kind of get used to this, and so regardless of getting a lot of education from overseas, when you are in a particular context, there's this pressure, especially when you're in a particular positions, in which there's the expectation of making contribution to different kind of expectations of your patron, and so people kind of resort to not doing a lot of things, but doing other things that may not be directly related to improving the education system, but only to satisfying the expectation of the patron. And so because of this, people kind of try to make their own living through other means as well, as you mentioned, trying to teach and all of that part-time just to earn extra, because there's an expectation for you to make certain contributions for certain causes. But then this is something that may not be directly related to the improving the education system itself. Yeah, thank you. I hope that addresses your question.
Okay, I see somebody else raising their hand, but I'm going to get to that in just a second, I promise. We have Sotiari Tok asking a question about political regimes. They're asking, political regime still dominates the issues of Cambodian education policymaking, given that highly educated Cambodians have not fully contributed to the sector. In your opinion, how would we deal with this?
Thank you. That's $1 million question, in my opinion. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think a lot of people have tried to answer that question. I tried to do that, and honestly, we have, I think if we try to calculate, we have spent billions of dollars trying to address the education system, the issues in the system, but a lot of it are influenced by political interest and all of that. So I'm afraid I'm not able to kind of address how we solve this issue, but then I want to share kind of what I think we can do in terms of if we are really if we really want to improve the education system, if we really want to do that. But of course, there are always political interests and all that anywhere. But then, if we really strongly committed to this, this is just something that come up to me recently. I traveled to European countries, particularly the Nordic countries in particular, and look at the education system of those countries. So there's a lot, and there's a strong focus on something that are not necessarily neoliberal. But the thing, what's interesting, that people can still do better in terms of meeting the performance tests like PISA and all of that, without actually teaching or adopting policies according to the neoliberal policies. So focus on like holistic curriculum, focus on learning that emphasize the connections between nature, between human beings, between all of us, and not looking at education as a commodity and all that. And so in terms of practice, this is like me imagining as a millionaire with all the money in the world that can just do anything with it. Like, okay, let's have a group of think tank researchers in Cambodia who are fully funded, so they don't have to care about teaching in the evening classes just to make ends meet, but then research all of these policies, ideas, and then think about what we can do in our education system by looking at these. And I've learned that even like countries like Cuba, for example, they have a very good education system, although this is a communist society, but they have certain focus. Of course, there are bad things in that. There's an emphasis on certain political, education and things like that. But there are a lot of things that Cuba has done right in terms of doing well with teacher training, with equal access to education among for all people from kindergarten all the way to universities and all that. So there are a lot of things we can learn from whether this is East or Western societies, but then look at those ideas beyond just this trying to catch up with the modernity of advanced societies, but then focus on promoting kind of more holistic education as public good approach of thinking that I think will help. But this is a very, very idealistic opinion, and I don't think it is possible, but it is doable if politics is out of the equation. But then this is not doable again. So for that question, I'm afraid I don't really have an answer to that.
That's understandable. That is a really big question. But I think your response has really hit on some interesting points about the way that we orient ourselves to education, and how how neoliberal ideas about education, even if they're coming from a good place of trying to give people their due, in a sense, as like lecturers or assistant professors, associate professors going through that mark, it still is trapping us in this kind of feedback loop of how do you view education in a particular way. It's a great discussion. One of the other questions, I believe somebody else was raising their hand, but we'll see if they come back around. Tira Tun also wanted to ask if they also first wanted to thank you for your presentation, but also wanted to ask you if you thought that Cambodia's war and post-war conditions have a role to play in this kind of post-colonial context and creating these subjectivities.
Thank you, Tira, for a good question. Yes, this is something interesting. When I wrote my doctoral dissertation like 5-6 years ago, what's interesting for me was that when I traced the educational development in post-colonial Cambodia from the end of colonialism in 1953 until now, what kind of surprised me was that the war war years, especially the communists, like the Khmer Rouge regime, was the only one that was shielded from this colonial from this kind of colonial legacies in terms of education before. But well, it's a very extreme form of education. But the thing is that it is very it's the one that really kind of cut itself off from the colonial legacies and the legacies of the previous regimes. That is the Sangkum regime and all that. So this is something interesting. But on the war itself and how the legacies of the war and all that, of course, they really have a key role to play here, especially how the war. First of all, the conflict, the prolonged armed conflict, we have more than, we count kind of remaining fighting until the late 1990s. So it's nearly 30 years. It's nearly 30 years of armed conflict. So those have left kind of, unimaginable destruction on the infrastructure, on the education system as a whole. So this is something that we need to keep in mind. And then another thing is that the conflict itself has resulted in the death of a lot of educated Cambodians who were highly educated before the war years, and so we kind of started from very low level in the post-war conflict in terms of trying to build education system. We don't really have people who are educated, a lot of people who were educated. We don't have infrastructure and all that. So all of these have really, made a significant impact on what different governments have tried to do over the past few decades. Not only in terms of the infrastructure, but in terms of the facilities, other facilities in terms of textbook, basic textbook and all that, and let alone all of those major policies and all that. So that is something to consider. And then in the post-war context, and that is something I talked about earlier a little bit as well in terms of the reconstruction, post-conflict peace building reconstruction. This is something that was interesting to me in the sense that this opening up of the border to for aids to come in and all that has introduced different kinds of policies, ideas, policy discourses. We know policies, ideas are traveling all over the world, whether they have agency or not, but we can't give them agency, so they travel from one place to another because people bring them here. And so that is how we are where we are today, because in the effort of bringing allowing aids to come in, of trying to rebuild, we also bring these new policy discourse, policy ideas, and we in the past we did not have much to say because we are relying on those. So the policy developments and reform ideas were basically led by donors. And so we just say yes to a lot of things. But then, as I said earlier, we now have a lot of more people. We have more educated people who kind of try to engage in the discussion, sit at the table, talk to, international assistant and international consultant, or engage in discussion, trying to interject our, ideas, our local context into that as well. So that is something we need to keep in mind. But one more thing that I would like to add, and I think this is, I think like after the war ended, like people hunger for knowledge. People just want more knowledge, and because we were in a situation when we didn't really have a lot of educated people, and so people kind of just embrace anything that allowed them to get more knowledge, whether you go to public school, is limited in various ways, but then, okay, you have private school, just go and get knowledge, absorb more knowledge, and how this, people kind of, without for a while, people really didn't think, okay, we just want to get educated and rebuild and all that, but they're not really thinking about much how this may shape the way they think about education itself, and especially education as a commodity. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, that was really interesting and thought-provoking. It's also bringing to mind another question I had about your interlocutors or your participants, about they went to higher education in Western countries. They got masters and PhDs in Western countries. And I was wondering if it came up at all for your participants, whether or not they reflected back on their time as university students in Cambodia and how their impressions of that experience kind of changed as they went through these other higher education experiences. I don't know if you had those conversations, but I thought I might ask to see if that was part of something that came up as they talk through their experiences and the way that they think about changing higher education in Cambodia.
Okay, yes, thank you, Jessica. Yeah, a little bit. We didn't really talk much about that, but yes, a little bit. One thing I think I could I talk about that is thinking about, like a lot of these, people, struggling through, we have our public education system, the way the curriculum was designed, the teaching, very, very, rote learning, memorization of that, and I myself and others, we were not exposed to opportunities for critical thinking and all that. So a lot of people can talk about, despite those challenges, we made it this far. We made it to Western universities, engage in the discussion, the debate with them. We struggle in one way or another. We struggle to engage with people who have, who didn't really have to think about this when they started elementary school, for example, or kindergarten, like elementary school students starting to engage in discussion of that. But I didn't, like myself, I didn't really get into that until I started university. So I was not really, when most of these research participants were not really oriented to this, but then they can reflect that what their issues in the education system, but we made it this far. So we got there, we learn to develop critical thinking skill, and cultivate these skills. But then when they look back, they think about, I made this far, but it's a lot of struggle in the sense that there's a lot of inequality in the education system. So people had to, engage in private tutoring of that. It's a kind of shadow education in Cambodia. It's very commonly known in the country. So a lot of people had to really work so hard in order to, earn a little bit of money in order to pay for their own education going through this, because the way we organize our education, because of lack of resources and all that, it is very inequitable. It is generally elitist. It means that people who have more can have access to better education. People who have less, well, you can still have access to education, but less quality education. So as I taught earlier, when I go to Cambodia, each time I visit Cambodia, I see, every corner of the street, you see a private school or center or something like that. And so I think, and then I have my kids, my nephews and nieces going to these, little ones going to this school, like, okay, how much you pay here, how much you pay there. It's like, now, when you look at all of these schools, because this is our multi-tiered education system, especially the privatization. And so you're kind of stratifying the students. So, okay, now you go to this corner school, you pay this much, and then you learn this much, and then you get to do this job, like, can you maybe drive a motor dope or somewhere? And then, okay, you can afford to go to that, international school, you pay that much, your parents could afford it. So you get that CEO job somewhere. So that's how you stratify people, how the education system, the way we privatize it, the way we look at education as a commodity, and the way we allow the privatization to flourish. and the school kind of mushrooms all over the cities and the urban areas, then in the next 10 and 20 years, you will see that these people will just, okay, like they are sorted into different occupations later on. And that is how, you know, the inequity in the education system is created. And thinking about your questions, Leah, like I might go too far into this, but things that all these participants reflect on this, but they also think about how hard it was for them, you know. They got that opportunity, but to get there, you know, it's really a lot of hard work, and not everyone was able to get that far because of all sorts of reasons, economic and other things, and especially the way that our system was designed and the limited resources in the system, for the system.
Yeah, because it's not just the limitations of what people can afford, but it's also the way that the system is structured is due to restrictions in funding. Yeah, absolutely. I think there was somebody who had raised their hand earlier. I'm not sure if they still wanted to ask a question. It's been a minute, but if you would like to, I'd welcome you to raise your hand again. And of course, direct people to ask questions in the Q&A chat. I just saw you and then you went away. There we go. All right. Vuti, go ahead and ask your question.
Okay.
Good morning. Could you hear me?
Yes, Bon.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Thank you very much, Dr. Sen and the moderator for hosting the webinar here. My first question is any of your key informant coming from the Royal Academy of Cambodia? The reason behind that question is if the knowledge, so the knowledge transfer, how or face problem, whether that is a question of adaptation or applying to a situation of Cambodia, and maybe there's a way to recycle, to reformulate the knowledge, and then maybe reproduce it, the knowledge, and then applying it to Cambodia situation. That's the question behind whether the Royal Academy of Cambodia play any role in absorbing knowledge and then reapplying it or make it suitable. The second thing I have is you talk a little bit about Cuba, and somebody else asked about was any comparison between the situation of Cambodia and Thailand. And looking back to Cambodia, and also you, at least for a couple of times, saying that if you go to Cambodia at every turn, you see a private education. So there's a privatization aspect of it. And I'm thinking about, so let's see, Cambodia came out from war, coming from socialism, communism, all that kind of stuff. I was thinking about, is it because Cambodia is kind of like a free market oriented, all that kind of stuff, 100%. I was thinking about, how about what happened to Vietnam? They also somehow adopt free market economy, but it's still a communist country. I wonder what happened to the education. How about Laos? Is it still a socialist country? And what happened to the education system? Of course, all these countries open to the Western globalization, for example, or that kind of stuff. I wonder what would be the impact. So I think those are the couple of questions I have at the moment. And also for privatization, I have a friend who worked for UNICEF. And every time we talk about education, it's a little bit stressful for him because it's, again, related to the concept of your, learn helplessness. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had been working for UNICEF for probably 30 some years. And every time we talk about it, it's just sort of a helpless moment to move things along. But
no change.
Yeah, but you didn't
We
say
had
how to work
private,
with the
okay.
government. Yeah, you didn't say how to work with the government, which is somewhat different from NGO. Anyway, but that's kind of my comment and then the question I have about this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bong. Thank you. So, okay, for the first question, I cannot actually say who I interviewed and all that, but then there was no one. Yeah, there was no one from the Royal Academy of Cambodia. I tried to recruit a lot of people from different places, especially I was looking for people who were, engaged in projects related to higher education, in particular, higher education reforms, policies. I had a long list of people I wanted to interview, tried to contact them, but a lot of them did not get back to me yet. So that's something. But on the question of Royal Academy of Cambodia, this is something interesting. I have a few people I know that are friends or colleagues from there, working there, and sometimes this is an idea that I have, and I sometimes wonder if RAC can be used as a place to look back into our knowledge system, Cambodian knowledge system, and how and our education system. I think we did not learn. We did not know much about who we are. And I talked to all of these research participants as well, right? They basically talk, we don't know much about who we are, our education system, our knowledge system, and all that. We have very kind of brief, very general understanding about this, but then we have not had, at least as far as I'm concerned, I have not come across texts and all that really give us deep knowledge into our knowledge system, our so-called indigenous Cambodian knowledge system, and our education system, and how we can use that in consideration of what we learn from Western or other knowledge system, and how we can make use it in a way that serves our purpose, that serve the purpose of promoting a more equitable education system that is for kind of public good and not so much for private good. And I tend to see the Royal Academy has that role, but maybe I have not been aware of what's coming out from the Royal Academy of Cambodia in terms of their publications and all that. So I apologize if I missed something that's already out there, but I have not done enough research into this. But I would appreciate getting informed of this as well if you're aware of that. So that's one thing. And the next thing about privatization, yes, of course, we have privatization in all countries. Even where I am here in Canada, it has one of the best education system, but we still have private education, private schools. Here we call independent schools, but people kind of try to fight this by pushing the government to continue to fund public school more and more and all of that. So that is something that happens everywhere. Now, I'm not against privatization per se. What I'm against is how we privatize education to the extent that we forget what education is for. We focus too much on education is for private good, for individual good. For you go to school, you learn, you get education, you have yourself, and that's it. That is what I'm against. But if we promote a kind of thinking, kind of that look at education as a public good, and we have room for participation of some private providers, and that is something that has been done in other countries as well. For example, I went to Finland just last month, and then I talked to different people about, there's still private schools over there, but basically people kind of say nobody really want to go to private school because the public school is already the best, and any school is the same. So when you build education like that, you kind of build education, a public education that make private school disappear. because you build education, a public education that is for public good, that is for collective benefits, that is not a private commodity, and so that is something that that's something that I'm for. I'm not against privatization when it is done in a way that is for the common good. But of course, it's really hard when you bring the private interest into the public system. It's never easy to get rid of the private invested interest in all that. I forgot the third question. If Jessica could help, is there a third question? No. Or comment, yeah.
More of a comment. I only have 2 down, so.
Okay, yeah. I think Effie raised their hand.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought I saw another hand. I have another question in my mind cooking, but there's somebody else who has another question. So I'd invite the person who raised their hand, since sometimes I don't always see, to go ahead and raise it again if you have a question that you'd like to ask.
I think there's a question there as well in the chat room.
Yeah, so there's another one that's asking about higher education institutions in the provinces.
Okay.
I think they wanted to know if you selected all of your key informants or all of your participants in higher education institutions in Phnom Penh, or if there are some institutions in the provinces too that were involved in your data for this research. And then they also wanted to ask how you think the possibility of having gaps in institutional environments in Phnom Penh and the provinces. I think that they mean like how you think that could be ameliorated, or how you think that plays out in the way that these kinds of ideas about making policy end up. And then does the commodification of education have different meanings in the capital versus the provinces? So a lot of
okay, yeah, a lot of, but thank you very much for the questions. For this research, I did not focus on higher education institutions. I focus on people who have worked on projects related to higher education reform. So it was not restricted to where they are, but all of them were in Phnom Penh, because that's how colonial. That's again like a legacy of colonialism is like, okay, you're from rural area, you go get education and then come back. Don't come back to the rural area. And that is how the French colonial, approach to modernization of higher education started. And that's how it has become over the past 100 years. And so that is something. And so when talking about this, the research is not specifically about, informants from where they are. They all of them from Phnom Penh, because that's how their social mobility, that represent their upward social mobility. And so yeah, all of them in Phnom Penh. But then there's a question about gaps in the institution. I think this may not be related to my presentation today specifically, but this is something I've written about before. I've done research on this before, and how. And this is something I've talked about a little bit earlier, in how inequality in education system, in educational infrastructures, facilities, and all of that, they are different in the sense that a lot of resources tend to be spent for the institutions in the urban areas, because that's how you kind of that's how colonial way of working is. Like you kind of, you have the center and then you have the periphery from the outside. That is how you can move people from the periphery to the urban center, upward social mobility, living lives on the rural and coming here. And so we will just develop education system in the urban areas. If you want to come get education, come to Phnom Penh, for example. That is how. And that is the question of access and inequity in the education system. So in terms of commodification of education, have different meanings in the capital and rural provinces. I'm not sure about that. I haven't really done work, research into that, but I think that I have family members in the provinces as well, and they participate in private. They attended private schools in the province as well. And so in a way there are differences in terms of resources, and I think the way private institution thinks about, most of them at least, is that it's just the way the private institution as well, like you can just develop big campuses and strong programs in the urban centers, because that's how a lot of people flock from the rural area into the city. But then you can develop some kind of private school in the rural areas to cater for the needs of a small population of people who may need this, but then the quality they just don't really give much attention to, because that is how this kind of colonial way of doing things works. But then I think we've seen more and more kind of schools going to different provinces, and the government has also opened many several major public universities in the provinces as well, and there are private universities in the provinces as well. I cannot say much in terms of quality of that, because I've never been to those places, and have not done research into that particular area as well. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to add, just based on my own participants and interlocutors' statements, there's a lot of privatization that's happening that they're also taking advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
Interlocutors are Cambodians going to universities in Phnom Penh, so very similar kind of post-colonial trajectory as you're talking about. And if you're really interested in this kind of question about privatization and looking more into maybe not necessarily the rural-urban divide, but how privatization is impacting education in Cambodia, I would just definitely recommend Will Brem's work to anyone who's interested in looking into it more. I believe we have a few more questions, but I did want to give some space to Vichet, if you wanted to add anything about your interlocutors' experiences and these 4 subjectivities that you had talked about in your talk. Wanted to give you some space to kind of elaborate a little bit more on some of those concepts, because I feel like we've kind of been poking at a few of them as we've been going through the Q&A, and I wanted to give you some space to talk maybe about how the distribution of your informants ended up in the different categories or the different subjectivities that you saw.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. So there are quite a number of interesting things and observations, and especially things that emerge from the data in terms of the perspectives of different people. How one thing I would like to highlight is the my deep appreciation for few people, especially those in the third category that is still there, because I known some of them for years, have seen their work and have seen their contributions and their commitment. I think for these people, especially in this third group, there's this sense of some of them, this sense of gratitude in terms of paying back to the system for having gotten them to where they are today. In a sense that, despite the increasing sense of learned helplessness, they still, I'm just going to stay. And in some kind of thing, I'm just going to stay for a few more years and see. The things that they have other things, and even they talk about their family members who kind of have frustration about all of these things, and then want them to quit, to move away, and then do something else. But then there's this again sense of gratitude that I just need to pay back my debt, in a sense, that I've gotten this far because because I've got certain kind of support despite the challenges in the system. And there are people who kind of think about, if you just talk and you don't do it, how can you change? So people who see themselves as change agents, they just talk from outside of the system, from not directly engaged in the system in one way or another through, being in the government, being in a civil servants or being consultants or that, but just engage in that and engage in the ideas like, okay, we know that there are international donors, international consultants are engaged in this, but if we don't go there, engage with them, they will just impose ideas from somewhere else without good relevance to our context. But by us being engaged in this, then this is how we can educate them in some way about who we are, about our context, and then maybe this will have some positive impact on the policy ideas and the reforms itself. But one thing that I would like to highlight is that there's this like for these people, there's so much pressure in terms of, because when you engage in this project, it's very, fast-paced, and you have to deliver that within this and that time frame. And so people kind of try to engage and do a lot of things, but then they have not had the time to just sit back and see, have it done enough exploration of other policies, idea that they can use for the betterment of my education system, other than these ideas that seem to be everywhere in the world. And so this is something that people kind of under the pressure of just completing the deliverables, this one by this month, this one by this month, but not having time to really think, intellectually and critically and exploring ideas, who they are, their own ideas and ideas from others in a more in-depth and critical way. So that is something I learned from the participants as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you so much for that. There was another question. I believe somebody raised their hand, but I see Paul Eng has asked a question in the Q&A. Let's see. Cambodia has a robust higher education system considering the country's level of development. How do you see the changes of university or higher education institution governance so far? So what's your perception of the changes so far?
Thank you, Ho Eng. So yeah, I've seen there's this the World Bank has, there have been 2 projects going on. The current projects being concluded in a year or 2, and then a 3rd project is being planned. But then so far there's this, as part of this policy reform and all of that, there's a push of making these institutions, some of the higher education institutions, independent, have their own governing boards and all of that. So that is something I have seen, trying to, build capacity of different universities that they want to push into, I think it's called public administrative institution, PAI, to be able to do things without relying on the government and the ministry and all of that, but that having the capacity to do their own financings and all of that. So when I look at this, I see 2 things. One thing is that then this is kind of pushing universities to be kind of trying to decentralize, trying to move away from centralized system of governance of higher education institutions in Cambodia. So that is, in a way, trying to promote independent autonomy of the universities. That is a good thing, and that is something that seems to be operating quite well in a lot of countries, including Canada here, which I've seen. The government just gives certain kind of funding for particularly, but it is up to the university to make their own decisions about how to use all of those funding. But one thing that I have seen that kind of concerns me, and this is something that was raised by a few research participants as well, is that when you kind of make these universities become independent, then there's this concentration of power within the university, and then resorting back to the patronage system, and then at the end of the day, we get nothing out of that. Because we try to promote independent thinking, the participation of different stakeholders, but then when you concentrate the power to control everything, to make decisions in the universities, not based on democratic process, but based on certain practices that is patent client or patronage in nature, then it doesn't get anywhere. And then we are back to square one, just at a different level. And that is my concern. And that is something that was raised by a few research participants as well. They've seen that, you know, this process is good, but then what's happening in that smaller organism, organization within a university is something concerning. Yeah.
Okay. I believe I saw another hand go up. I believe it was Vuti Chow again, but I might be wrong. If you would like to raise your hand, or anyone else would like to ask a question, we might have time for 1 or 2 more questions, as long as you're okay with that, Vichet, and then we might.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
There's a question. Okay, yeah.
Here we go.
Please raise your hand. Yeah.
Go ahead, Vuti.
Yeah, thank you. And I would like to just, because now I'm here, people ask questions and then I hear the response back from Dr. Sen, and I just keep me thinking. I came from Battambang, and I usually keep close, even though I have been far away from that town for 30 some years. I always keep an eye on it to see what changed there, what impact, how it has come along to the 21st century. So, but lately I see in Battambang, we have a University of Battambang, and they again go back to the 60s. They started with small and that kind of stuff, become a teacher training, become a headquarter for UN TAC. But lately, and then it have been since 2008 become a University of Battambang. I made a few stops there every time I went back home. But lately they become at a National University of Battambang, and there's a lot of building added to it, a library, a computer lab, IT lab, and then also some other sort of science-oriented type STEM field doing stuff. So I see that's a good sign in terms of impact, absorbing knowledge, and then how impact on social development and economic or otherwise. But in 2022, I was very happy. I was just on my way home from Phnom Penh. I made a stop there, and I met two young ladies along the Songkai River, and I asked them, and they say, "Oh, I'm a student of University of Battambang." And I asked them where you came from. They say, "I came from Siem Reap because I want to study something else that's not in the hospitalities field." And then I was taken back by it. And but they also said that it somehow it's affordable to them, to their family, because it's close to Siem Reap, and also probably the fee probably smaller than going to all the way to Phnom Penh. So it's kind of like give them an opportunity to learn something else, and also be still closer to home in Siem Reap. So I'm very hopeful about that. So again, we're talking about the impact of absorbing higher education or knowledge from abroad, and then how to apply it to spread it. We talk about equity, all that kind of stuff, and I see that's a good sign. Hopefully that will become something. And I joke with my friend that so we have, in Battambang we don't have Angkor Wat, but we have Angkor. So a rice bowl of Cambodia is Battambang traditionally, and I hope people revisit that idea to see we have something else to offer to the next generation, and also grow with it. Thank you.
Thank you. for sharing. I think your point reminds me of one important point made by one research participant, and I like to share that as well. And I think this is reflecting back on my own experience. This is something that I kind of adopted earlier, especially during my education in in Cambodia over the years, not just in Cambodia but abroad as well. Is that one thing that we need to do more, and I mean a lot more, is especially in terms of teaching at the university. I mean, most of the times, if we look at the a lot of the universities and buildings and all of the infrastructure, a lot of private universities or even public universities, we see, even the gate at the entrance is the gate to another world, for example. It's so big, so huge. And then, but I mean, when you go inside, it's like there's nothing there. There's nothing there. There's so little there. And then this reminds me of one important comment by one research participant, is that our teaching, whether university or K-12 and all that, we need to focus more on substance but not form. And I was like, his point kind of brought it back to how I came to define my education, and how I kind of try to accumulate this and that, because, well, in one way or another, my mind was colonized to embrace this social mobility through this idea of moving out of the rural area into the urban area. And the education system, I noticed as I went through those stages in my educational years, that there's a lot of putting a checklist on, okay, I completed these degrees, like I completed 3 degrees, 4 degrees, but then, well, I don't know how to engage, and I don't know much how to reason, for example. I don't know much how to engage in the critical discussion. Well, you can choose option A or option B, but then do you really know how to reason from a more critical way? So this is something that is kind of missing in a lot of the teaching and learning in not just in K-12 but in higher education in general in Cambodia. We focus a lot on forms. That is like, I finished this 10 courses, I'm done with the program. But then when we actually look at the substance of the learning from completing these courses, it's not much, because we just focus on checking all of this. And because the teaching, the resources, the learning activities in the classroom focus a lot on memorization and rote learning, we don't engage a lot on debate and critical discussion on ideas and all of that, looking at the real life situation and discuss those. This is something that we need to work on more. Focus less on forms, but more on the substance. And that requires, rethinking about the curriculum and the approaches to teaching and all of that. And that involves teacher training and all of that. So that is something I would like to share. It's somehow related to a point made by Bombati earlier. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Was there something else you wanted to add?
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I feel like that resonates a lot with what I've also experienced and what I've also heard. A lot of the times when students would go through classes, they would seek out alternate options through not necessarily the Riangua, but instead the NGO-led workshops or other free workshops that people could attend to kind of gain those skills for themselves, instead of expecting them in their public school classes or even their private school classes often. And it's something that people constantly look elsewhere for as they go through education. Yeah, it's been a really, really interesting discussion. I'm sure that there's a lot more that we could talk about and a lot more that we can go through. At this point, if Vichat, if you're okay with providing your email address, we can definitely get that out to everyone if you have additional questions.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Where do we live? Like in the chat room or?
Yeah, actually, Mong somebody, what would be best?
In the chat room is okay.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Now I was looking at the questions like where do I live?
Oh, there's another. I can
So,
already see another great question in the Q&A that I
yeah, please. Yeah, I could entertain another question. Yeah.
Okay. I have one really good one from another attendee who is remaining anonymous, suggesting, have you looked at Buddhist higher education contributed in decolonizing knowledge systems? I'm assuming you're meaning something more along the lines of like how Buddhist higher education has reshaped these kinds of knowledge patterns and thoughts. But if you'd like to add more, by all means, add more in the Q&A so we can get a little more context. But Chat, if you'd like to talk about that.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure you refer to a particular Buddhist higher education somewhere, but this is something I'm actually interested in as well, exploring. Like I'm interested in exploring ideas. I haven't really looked into this, but something I'm interested in exploring. What are the kind of institutions that we can look into in order to promote a particular kind of education system that is more relevant to our context, but still allow us to really do well globally, but then we don't really have to have I have to do this and that, but a kind of more holistic. And I think Buddhist a form of education may be a way, but then I don't know much about that, and I would be interested to learn more. If there's anything that you would like to suggest I look into, I have my email there. Please send me any resources and materials that you think I should look into, and I appreciate it because it's something I'm interested in as well. Yeah.
Great. I think that's all that I saw in the chat. Thank you again. Thank you so much, Vichat. Thank you everyone who attended, and of course everyone who asked questions. This was a really interesting and stimulating discussion. I have a lot I need to think about for my own dissertation work, and I really appreciate you taking the time to present your thoughts and your research to us.
Thank you very much, Jessica, for moderating this, and thank you to the audience for participating. There's so many interesting questions, a lot of things for me to think about further, a lot of things for me to reflect on. And of course, I've seen more project ideas that I can work on in order to, contribute in some way to, understanding what the issues we are facing, and hopefully we can, contribute to positive positive development of the education system in one way or another. But thank you to all. Yeah. All right.